is a teaching message by Pastor Forrest Hill, founder and pastor of Church of the Living Water, Austin. Now, here's Pastor Hill with a life-changing message.
All right, now if you have your Bibles, go to the book of Genesis chapter 19. Seems like we spent a lot of time on Genesis chapter 18, and we're going to spend maybe just as much time on chapter 19. We're trying to gain some understanding. I'm a person who watch current events. I pay close attention to the political structure of countries and how they flow. And I want to compare them to the nations that we read about in the Bible. And so when we get to this 19th chapter, because I've heard some things from people, they made some statements. I'm trying to say this so that you don't misunderstand me. They were political statements about certain sins. I don't believe that we need to make political statements about certain sins. I'm like, if we're going to talk about sin, let's talk about all of it, not just some of it. And since we come up on the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, our understanding is that maybe God destroyed them because they were homosexuals, and I'm like, but there are other nations with homosexuals in it, and God hadn't destroyed them. I am not saying that homosexuality is right, because it isn't. I'm saying the way that we present a thing, we will excuse everything but that. And I think that that's wrong. I think that if you follow the downfall of a nation, you will find that there is one sin that led to it all. Now, I heard a gentleman, and this is what he said. He said that when you find homosexuality in a community or in a nation, in a city, he said, then everything else follows it. And I'm like, I beg to differ. When you hear it, because you're used to hearing it from a political standpoint, see, because every time it's time to vote, we're either talking about abortion or homosexuality, right? And I'm like, if it's time to vote, tell me what you're going to do. I don't want to hear, because sin is out there, period. For example, in this thing called abortion, any type of abortion, certain people are against. So you get a woman who has a pregnancy in her tubes. Well, if it's against the law to have an abortion, she is going to be identified as a criminal because it's outlawed. See, I listened to them carefully. And so I listened to them talk about homosexuality. Again, I believe that homosexuality is a sin. I don't believe a practicing homosexual can be saved. I don't believe a practicing adulterer can be saved. A practicing liar can be saved. He who sleeps with porn stars, I don't believe they can be saved. I don't believe that. Well, Pastor, nobody's perfect. And I agree, nobody's perfect. But we ought to be at least sincere. And sincerity won't let you stay in the thing that you've been in. Are you with me? So, last chapter 18, we saw that God went to visit his friend, didn't he? He went to visit Abraham. And he said something before he left, after he had lunch with Abraham. He said, shall I hide from Abraham this thing that I do, seeing that he shall become a great and mighty nation? And he told Abraham that the things that I have heard about Sodom, I'm going down there to see if it's so, and if it is, I'm going to know it. In other words, I'm getting ready to pronounce judgment. And when you read chapter 19, you find that there are some homosexuals in the community. I don't know if the whole city's homosexual or what. I just don't know that. I'm just saying that we come across that, right? But there are other things that the Bible hates or says that God hates. And we think that we're relatively safe, especially those that are whoremongers and harlots. They think they're relatively safe because at least I'm not doing that. And so I had to examine the Bible again to see what the Bible actually said. I went to the book of Romans, I'm going to show you in a minute, to see what Romans says man's issue was. And then the first thing that he mentioned, it wasn't homosexuality. Homosexuality was eventually mentioned. But in the progression of man's sins, he digresses to another level to where he'll do anything. Are you listening? So now, unless you walking as a saved individual, don't say what you won't do, because sin will actually get you to digress to the place where you have no ability to resist anything. Are you with me? All right. Chapter 19, let's start at verse 1. And there came two angels to Sodom at evening, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned into him, and entered into the house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Now I'm going to stop there because I want you to see something here. Here is Lot. Now you remember Lot is Abraham's nephew. And now he's he's not around Sodom and Gomorrah. He's sitting at the gate. Right? He sees these angels. I don't believe that they appeared as angels, but Lot knows enough about God to know that there's something different about these men. And he tells them, come to my house. And they said, no, we're going to stay in the street. And he's like, no, I'm not going to let you stay in the streets. This is not a safe place after dark. Come stay with me. And they came and stayed with him. But now this position of sitting at the gate, Lot is a judge. He has gone down to Sodom and become a politician. That's what has happened. He left Abraham and left the knowledge of God and went to Sodom to become a judge. So Lot has brought upon himself some trouble because he now lives in Sodom. In Genesis 13 and 12, it says, Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But he has interacted with them, and he has a position as judge. The thing here is, either you're going to affect the lives of others, or they're going to infect you with their lifestyle. Now, here's a people in Sodom and Gomorrah known for homosexuality. But here's the question. How did they come to that corruption? How did they get there? Look at this in Romans. In my study time and listening to people, I've heard people say, well, homosexuality isn't mentioned in the New Testament. I'm like, well, it is. It isn't mentioned directly like you find in certain spots of the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, it is mentioned with every other sexual sin. It is called fornication. See, fornication is not just illicit sex between two unmarried people, a woman and a man, but it is illicit sex with two unmarried people, whether they be male or female. All of that is considered fornication. Here's the thing about Americans. When they read the Bible, they read it from the perspective of their culture and how they perceive a word. But the Bible wasn't written like that. So here we have a word in the Greek, fornication, which is porneia. We get our word pornography or pornographic from that word, which includes all of it, not some of it. When you look that word up in the Greek, when God talks about that in the Bible, he's talking about every misconduct sexually that can be done by a man. Everything that's mentioned in the Old Testament, everything mentioned in the law, everything mentioned in Leviticus, when God speaks in details about who you can and cannot have sex with, all of that in the New Testament is labeled fornication. Are you with me? When you read Leviticus, Leviticus tells you it's forbidden for you to sleep with your mother, your father, your stepmother, your stepfather, the daughter of your stepfather, your cousin. You can't sleep with animals. See, God lists it all. But when you get to the New Testament, it is called fornication. When God says that a woman shouldn't lie with woman unless she does with mankind, that's considered fornication. And a man shall not lie with man as with womankind, that's considered fornication. It is all fornication. Our problem is that when we sit down in our churches, no one defines it. We are a little afraid that we might offend somebody. I'm not afraid of that because somewhere along the line, you're going to get offended by something that's said because we're going to step on everybody's toes. We all have sinned and come short, so we got to come out of the way. So when you get to Romans chapter 1, people like to dilly-dally around verse 25 and 26, but I'm going to start at verse 21. And I want you to see this. Are you there? Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful. That's where it starts. That's where it starts. So now, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking about Sodom and Gomorrah. Now you remember, in our study in Genesis, we came up to Noah. And Noah was God's preacher, correct? And when the flood came, Noah was saved, his 3 sons, his wife, and their wives. All right? It was 8 in total that got saved. When he came out of the ark, all Noah knew was God. And the whole world was repopulated through Noah and his sons. And so God was preached. Everybody else had died. God was preached. All the way up till you get to Sodom and Gomorrah. They knew God at one time. Well, that was the prevailing doctrine. There was nothing else to compete with it. There was no Islam. There was no Buddhism. The only religion that remained was worship of God. So there was no competition. The problem was man was still in his sin. And then so Romans says this. It says, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God and were neither were thankful. So at some point, they stop wanting to walk with God. Now, I want you to know that that's the pattern that leads to degradation. You know who God is, but you stopped. And listen, it will follow your bloodline, whether you hear or not, and your children's children, and the children after them will have moved away from God. And this is what's happening. Watch what he says. He said, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into the image made like unto corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts. Do you see the progression of this? They stopped following God, became vain in their own thoughts, meaning that they thought they were God and they could do what they wanted to do. And then they started embracing different beliefs that they made up. You got to ask yourself, where do all these beliefs come from? I hear a lot of people that think that they're wise. And they say, well, it's so many religions out there. How do we know which one is the right one? Which ones have you searched? Which ones have you done some serious investigating about? Usually none of them. The one that is the most convenient for me, that brings about the less conviction, is usually what a lot of sinners will embrace. Don't shout me down. But that's what people want. This one that we have has accountability clause in it. This gentleman said, your God has temper tantrums and kill people. Right? See, I am not the person to talk to like that. You need to find somebody who don't know the Bible and tell them that. I don't know all of it, but I know why people got killed. Because that's the thing I wanted to find out about God. You know, and I'm like, so who did he kill from a temper tantrum? All the people in the Old Testament. I say, all of them? If he killed all of them, how are we still here? You know, you don't understand. So maybe they came across God wanted the Amalekites dead. They didn't even kill them, but he wanted them dead. Right? He wanted them dead. And I'm like, so why would he want them dead? Why would he kill them? He said, see, we don't read everything. We hear what someone else said and try to repeat it. He said to King Saul through the prophet Samuel, I remember what Amalek did to my people when they came out of Egypt. Now, when he told Samuel to tell Saul that was some 500 years later. He gave him 500 years to repent, and they still had the same attitude. He said, so send Saul down there and tell him I want them all gone. I don't want a memory of them on the face of the earth. Why, God? Because they dwell in the land that I'm giving you. And if we don't get it out the way, they will infect you. Now, we think, well, I don't know. Well, if the doctor diagnoses you with cancer and said we want to remove it, you're going to tell them that's a living organism. Just let it stay there. But it isn't beneficial for your life, is it? You wanted what? Anything that's detrimental to your life, you don't need in your life. What God is doing through Israel is saving the entire world. If the people that he's using to bring in salvation gets corrupted, then the whole world he has lost. Now, because you don't quite understand that, doesn't mean God is going to backtrack his decision. You know, a lot of things people do that you don't understand why they did it. But then later on, you benefit from it. Do you see what I'm saying? So here's what's happening. God has told Abraham, the land that I'm sending you to, that's what I'm giving you and your family. And your seed is going to come and save the entire world. But the Sodomites are there. And those of Gomorrah and the surrounding towns, these are corrupt people. They have started out by corrupting themselves. Their corruption was so bad that the nations that they were in league with broke covenant with them and went to war with them. Abraham had to go down there and deliver Lot, who was caught up with that skirmish. And God is thinking, if I leave Abraham here, see, we're going to all just live quiet and peaceable. That's not so. As a child, I grew up in East Austin. And when I was a young child, East Austin was a very decent neighborhood. The infrastructure was amazing. You had doctors and lawyers. You had restaurants and stores. We wouldn't have to leave our community. But then something happened. There were churches there, but something happened and the community changed. And before you know it, people were selling dope and they were selling crack on the corners. If you're from Austin, you know what I'm talking about in East Austin, right? And the community changed. And had nothing happened to stop that, it would have still been in the trouble that it's been in. Some places people were afraid to be in their own communities. I remember growing up and we lived near a cemetery. Late at night, you can hear gunshots. We take a shortcut through the cemetery, on our way to the store, and there are people up there and they're shooting up. And nobody wants to raise their children around that. That's bad influence. And something has to happen, has to change. Well, God was not going to let Israel be around that. Here's the problem that happened with Israel. When God sent them into the land of promise, after they came out of Egypt, he told them to run the Canaanites out. He didn't tell them to run everybody out, but the Canaanites had to go. Are you listening? The Canaanites. He didn't say everybody, but the Canaanites. The Canaanites are the descendants of Ham. Ham's son Canaan went in and disrobed his grandfather Noah. And God said, see, that stuff is going to follow them all their life. He said, but I'm going to make him a servant of servants. And so when they came into the land, God wanted them gone. Why? They wouldn't repent. They were going to do what they wanted to do. But Israel wouldn't. And the Canaanites did evilly affect Israel. To the point where you read in the Old Testament that when Israel had certain kings, that there were sodomites in the land. He said, well, what sodomites? They were Israelites who were homosexuals. Something was wrong. When you read the Kings, you read the Chronicles of the Kings, you read 1st and 2nd Samuel, you see the pollution of all of those kings. And you wonder what happened. They knew God, but they didn't honor him as God. And their society digressed. Are you understanding this? So what God is showing us, he's showing us a society that has digressed to the point where they'll do anything, and now God is ready to judge it. I'm trying to think, wow, what must Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns must have been like? I don't think they were like what we are, but I don't think we far from it. Well, you got to look at the corruption. Certain people can get pulled over by a cop for having a busted taillight and get the death penalty. Something's wrong with that society. And the person that shoots them or kills them will get off. Because they can no longer distinguish what is right and what is wrong. See, here it is. All of us are not considered citizens. No? When you go places and have to fill out certain things, they ask what you are. And usually you considered an other. You're an other. You go to the doctor's office and you're an other. What's an other? An other is someone that's not on the level of all the other citizens. So that's a nation that is on its way down. You paying attention? Watch this. Verse 23, and change the glory of the uncorruptible God into the image made like unto corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. See the progression? They no longer want to worship God. It's all about their own pleasure, and then they dishonor themselves. Now, the Creator says that illicit sex is dishonor. But in our wisdom, we say we in love. Now, who you think I'm going to believe? They dishonor themselves. It's dishonor. That's what God calls it. Well, no, we really in love. Then go get married. Well, I can't, the country has a law against me marrying a man. Well, that's definitely dishonor. If you're a man and you're going to marry a man. You know what that's like? That's like buying lamps and you have no electrical sockets. What you plug it into? I know. But I was called of God, not some denomination. So I don't have to pick and choose what I'm going to say. I'm talking to you the way you talk at home. So now you understand. Then you're like, well, I ain't going back. Then you might not want to. But that's the reality of it. That's against nature. Nature is against the nature of man. In the nature of man, man can only be fruitful when he has a woman. That's the nature of man. Now, I know about other animals and how they can reproduce asexually and all of that, but that's not man. There's a fish. I was tripping. There's this fish live in salt water. That's a female. But at a certain age, it can turn into a male and get to the place where it will fertilize another female. Now, that's not homosexuality. That's the nature of that fish. It was created to do that. But the nature of man is the nature of man, and it should not be dishonored. And my point is that it starts with first dishonoring God. When listen, it isn't the issue of people who don't know God. This is coming from people who say they know God.
This has been a teaching message by Pastor Forrest Hill of Church of the Living Water, Austin. If you would like more information about this message or Church of the Living Water, email us at colw@sbcglobal.com.